A young man named Peter walked into the forest and told his family he'd be back before they could finish their meal. That was almost 40 years ago, and he still hasn't come back. This is the creepy story of Peter, the boy who disappeared and then reappeared 40 years later. Peter lived in a small village in Germany with his mother and father. His parents ran a small inn, and people often saw Peter around the village walking with his sheep or helping out at the inn. So when one evening Peter said he was going to walk down to the forest on the edge of town to gather some firewood, no one really thought much of it. Peter lived on the edge of the village near an old gnarled forest. It was huge, ancient, and very few people went in because of all the creepy stories surrounding it. Some said that if you entered the woods, you wouldn't come back. Others said strange lights could be seen deep within its trees, and there were rumors of strange creatures lurking in the shadows. The townspeople preferred to stay away from it, but Peter didn't care about the legends. All he wanted was some firewood. He crossed the field behind their inn and headed into the woods. Soon the trees swallowed him whole and he was gone. At first, his mom wasn't too worried. Maybe Peter was just taking his time gathering wood, she thought, and maybe he would come back by the time they finished eating dinner. But that never happened. Peter never came back. His mom sat by the window and watched the sun go down. Still no Peter. His dad knocked on doors all over town, asking if anyone had seen him, but no one had. They decided to tell the police, but they were so sure Peter had simply gotten lost in the woods that they weren't too worried. They organized a search party and combed through the woods, but there was no sign of Peter. There were no signs of struggle or any indication of what might have happened to him. As the weeks went on, the villagers became convinced he'd been taken by one of the mythical beasts that lived in the woods. His parents refused to believe that, though. They kept hope alive that he would reappear safe and sound, even after months had passed and the snow began to fall. But one morning his mom found an abandoned backpack in the forest. Inside was a pair of shoes, some wood, and a torn piece of clothing. It was the same size as Peter's shirt, but it was too big and dirty for the police to do any DNA testing. And so once again, Peter's fate remained a mystery. His parents refused to give up hope, though, and they kept the room where he'd last slept and touched for decades, waiting for him to come home. Then in 2020, something incredible happened. One day, a man walked into the town looking for someone. He asked if anyone had seen a young man who had gone missing many years ago. The locals were puzzled. Why would anyone look for a missing person after all that time? But the man insisted, so they showed him a picture of Peter. The man looked at it and said that was the exact same man he had been looking for. But the man in the photo was clearly older, and the man looking for him was the exact same age as Peter when he went missing. Was this some kind of cruel joke? The locals thought, but it wasn't. As the man kept insisting, the mayor finally decided to check the records. The more he looked, the more confused he became. He couldn't find any record of the man ever being in the village, yet the faces of him and Peter were literally the same. Then he noticed that the man's clothes seemed very familiar. They were the same style as the ones Peter was wearing the day he vanished. And when he learned the man's name, his blood ran cold. It was the same name as Peter. Could it really be him? The entire town gathered in the square to confront the mysterious man. When they asked him who he was and how he knew Peter, he looked at them blankly and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." He didn't know why everyone was staring at him or why they thought he was Peter. All he remembered was waking up in the forest with no idea who he was or how he got there. He had no wallet, no cell phone, and no memories. The townspeople were devastated, believing that after all these years, their beloved Peter had come back only to discover he had no memory of who he was. But when the police took him to see Peter's parents, everything changed. The moment Peter's mom saw the man, she screamed, "That's my boy." She threw her arms around him and wouldn't let go. Peter's dad was skeptical, but when the man called him by name, he, too, broke down and hugged him tightly. It was really him. But how could he have been missing for 40 years and not a single sign of aging? No wrinkles, no gray hairs, not a single change in his appearance despite for decades passing. The doctors and scientists were baffled. Even after running tests, they couldn't figure out what had happened to him. To make matters even more confusing, Peter showed no signs of mental illness, and he clearly remembered living in the village and having parents. Yet there was no record of him anywhere. It was like he literally vanished off the face of the earth, and then reappeared without a single change. Then Father Wilhelm, the local priest, came forward with an explanation. He was the only one brave enough to venture into the forest all those years ago. and he was convinced something supernatural was lurking in those trees. Maybe whatever it was had somehow kept Peter young forever. But the German army disagreed. They sent in experts to comb through every inch of the forest. They even brought in helicopters and satellites, searching everywhere Peter had been. But they turned up nothing. The search made headlines across the country, and soon the whole of Germany was buzzing about the mysterious man who had spent 40 years in a forest and then returned without a single wrinkle. Scientists from all over the world offered theories. Some said Peter might have been in an induced coma after a rare medical condition temporarily shut down his brain. Others said he might have been cryogenically frozen, but that theory was quickly dismissed. If he'd been frozen, he should have had at least a few wrinkles. Still, no one had any answers. But as time went on, Peter seemed happy to just live his life in peace. After 40 years, he was finally home, and that was all that mattered. He moved back into his parents' house, started working at their inn, and slowly began to regain his memories. With each passing day, he remembered more and more about his old life. He remembered playing with friends, riding his bike around town, and having a dog named Rex. But there was still one giant question mark hanging over his head. What had happened in the forest all those years ago? One day, Peter decided he needed answers. He walked back into the forest, determined to find out what had happened to him. The trees seemed dark and foreboding, and Peter felt a sudden urge to run. But he pushed on, determined to get to the other side. Suddenly, he heard a noise. It sounded like a roar, like an animal. And then he saw it. Hidden deep in the trees was a massive cavern. As he watched, something strange began to happen. The ground rumbled, the trees swayed, and then the cave opened up, revealing a blinding light. Was this the mythical portal that everyone had been talking about? Had it been hiding all this time? Curious, Peter stepped closer. Then suddenly, his foot gave way and he tumbled into the cave. He tried to grab onto something, anything, but there was nothing there. And then everything went black. When Peter woke up, he was lying in a field. It looked just like the one behind his parents' house. He stood up and realized it really was. But it was a few hours earlier than when he had fallen into the cave. It was like he had traveled back in time. Excited, he ran to town, eager to share his discovery with the others. But when he told them what had happened, no one believed him. To them, it was just another crazy story from the woods. And so Peter kept it a secret. But now he knows what happened to him all those years ago. He slipped and fell into the cave. But instead of dying, he traveled back in time. Now, he wonders if maybe the portal is only open at certain times, which is why no one else has found it. Maybe he's the only one who can travel back in time and revisit the past. Whatever the truth is, he's not about to find out. After spending 40 years missing, he's just happy to be home. So does this story really happen? Let me know your thoughts. See you in the next video.